everyone, it's Sarah. Thanks for coming back to Scatterbrained, where I talk about some of the most interesting subjects you might have never thought about. Last week we spoke about prostitutes, which before the 20th century was really just an umbrella term for women who pissed off Anglican society. So, in that vein, I wanted to explore a person who also pissed off society, and it made me think about someone you may have never heard of, but is really badass. Theda Bara. My interest in Theda Bara actually originates in university when my professor talked about vamps and mentioned the first vamp, Theda Bara. She was Hollywood's first well-known femme fatale. I was intrigued, and instead of actually doing any schoolwork after class, I decided to look up who Theda Bara was. Long story short, I was captivated. A dark-haired, nice Jewish girl who pissed off American society? Guys, where do I sign up? Theda's image was carefully constructed by Fox Studios. She would go on to popularize the term vamp and would captivate American audiences with her exotic image. Her trademark black curls and dark eyes with heavy dark makeup only continued to emphasize this image. During her first press conference in Chicago, studio heads told the room that Theda was the daughter of an Arab sheikh and a French woman born in the Sahara. Her name, Theda Bara, was an anagram for Arab death. In reality, Theda Bara was actually from Cincinnati, Ohio, and her name was Theodosia Burr Goodman. Her father was a Polish Jewish immigrant, and her mother was of Swiss descent. Theda's movie star heyday was from 1915 to 1919. Movies, moving pictures, short films were a novelty back then. There was a lot of different experimentation, and people had never seen anything like movies before. They had no clue who these movie stars were. And also note that these were silent black and white films. In many instances, popular America thought that the characters were actually the actors. Can you imagine living in middle America, being a nice, good, wholesome, church-going citizen, and then going to the movies and seeing something like this? Or this? Or this? And Theda continued these press conferences, and she said she was an Arab princess, she did work in Paris, women, not American. She, I don't know, was put down the Nile in in a baby basket, she was Moses. But it's also necessary to realize that American audiences, particularly Americans from Anglo and German descent, were fascinated by the idea of exotic people from exotic places. This romanticization of exotic places goes all the way back to the 19th century during the Romantic period. When we talk about exotic, it usually means from places around the Middle East and the Mediterranean. People from these places were infantilized, and we can see how this romantic culture seeped into early filmmaking. For example, look at Rudolph Valentino. A lot of his appeal came from the fact that he was an Italian Latin lover. But even though Valentino did get his fair share of crap, let's remember that Theda was a woman, and an exotic woman scared American audiences. People thought this was some mythical, devilish woman who would come in the middle of the night and steal their husband from them and their children and do bad things that women do. I mean, she would go to press conferences and tell people that she ate men for breakfast. Which, is a relatable sentiment 100 years later. Let's also realize that during this time, censorship was not institutionalized. Theda was huge because she really was the testing ground. The controversy only aided her fame. Alright, let's go back and look at the facts. Theodosia, or she was actually known as Theda, was born in 1885 in Cincinnati, Ohio, and she grew up in the area. She became entranced by the theater in high school, continued to do theater in university, and after 2 years, moved to New York City to pursue a career in acting. Apparently, during this time period, she went to Paris and other places. We really don't know much about her acting career, but by 1915, she was back in New York City, where the film industry was located at that time, and starred in her first film, A Fool There Was. It was already a popular poem by Rudyard Kipling, and also a popular play. Theda did some more films in the New York City area. She was offered the role of Cleopatra in 1917. By that time, Los Angeles was really becoming the hub of the movie industry, so Theda moved to Los Angeles to film Cleopatra. Cleopatra was a really big film, and Theda continued to star in more films with her vamp role until 1919, which is when her contract with Fox ended. Fox refused to renew her contract due to increasing censorship demands. And Theda was kind of giving the studio a hard time. She was a trained actress and wanted to branch out in her roles. And Fox didn't want to hear her complaining. By 1921, she married film director Charles Brabin. Supposedly, Brabin discouraged Theda from making new films or involving herself in the film industry in general, but there's not too much direct evidence of that. Theda attempted 2 more comebacks after her break with Fox, but they weren't successful. By 1926, she was done for good and never starred in another picture again. But ultimately, and by most if not all accounts, after retiring for good in 1926, she seemed to live her best life. In 1955, Theda passed away from cancer, but interest in her life has been growing the past decade, and she's become kind of a symbol of counterculture and gothic culture. So where are Theda's films? Unfortunately, in 1937, a fire destroyed the Fox storage facility in the New York City area. This destroyed all of the masters of Theda's films. While there are some clips that exist of Theda's work, and you can watch the entirety of A Fool There Was on YouTube, Theda's legacy really lives on in a lot of her promotional stills. But contrary to many of her Hollywood contemporaries, Theda liked to stay home. She didn't go out and party. She wasn't into the really big Hollywood lifestyle. She was really invested in her characters. Theda created the vast majority of her clothes and costumes. That's right, those elaborate costumes were Theda's vision. Apparently she put a lot of research and time into these clothes. And from multiple accounts, we can see that Theda contributed a lot to the writing and production of her films. Theda negotiated her salary a few times during her career. By 1919, Fox was paying her $5,000 a week. Today, that's $75,000. I don't want to insinuate a narrative about Theda that wasn't true. Like I said, it's hard to separate the fact from fiction sometimes, especially since her heyday was now over 100 years ago, and the internet just continues to propagate a lot of the mythos. But I can say with a degree of certainty that Theda played a huge role in her productions and had a good amount of power too. Therefore, you can say that Theda's artistic input and power during production is inherently feminist. One of the reasons why I love learning about old Hollywood is learning about women's enormous contributions in filmmaking. In the early days, filmmaking was not centralized, and it wasn't really a business model yet. Yes, women were not equal, and they were continually harassed in the workplace. But they were visible. Women were involved in production in many different ways. There were female directors. There were a large amount of female editors. And any authority that women had in any industry and any art was extremely defiant of American gender roles in the early 20th century. Women's roles in these productions and in the movie industry in general really started to fade out by the mid-1930s. The studio system made the film industry run like a business, and women had no role in that. However, Theda's films express a very male narrative of female sexuality. Theda also epitomizes the very binary nature of English and American gender roles. She was seen as a dark woman, even though let's note that it was very clear that she was still white passing. Provocative, mysterious, fiery. And her opposite, the light, blonde, innocent, virgin young woman. Immediately after Theda's popularity, the popular woman was someone like Mary Pickford or Lillian Gish. Very blonde, very white, innocent-looking woman. And even though Mary Pickford wasn't a badass in her own right, they were very sweet, quiet, pure, all-American girls. Is this different from the portrayals of women we see in the media today? Not really. Yes, we have progressed in gender roles, but how many times do we see 2 different types of female characters in film? The dark, independent, feisty woman, or the light, almost always white, innocent, sweet, all-American girl. I mean, Jesus Christ, it's 2020, and I swear to God, we have the same 2 female characters all the time. But also realize that Theda's downfall was that a vamp like Theda cannot exist in the world of bubbly, sweet, wholesome, all-American Mary Pickford. It just shows that women are very binary, and lack any sense of personality. However, Theda's individuality and artistic integrity continues to influence and inspire people over a century later. She was integral towards the art of filmmaking, being part of those experimental individuals that helped shape movie making today. And in her own way, she forced Americans to confront the very repressed nature of their society. I'm still trying to understand what this means in 2020. It's very easy for us to demonize the past and romanticize the present. In reality, Theda might not be the sexually liberating feminist that we would like to see in 2020. She perpetuated the male gaze, and for expressing her sexuality, she is seen as the villain. A lot of her role was to discipline foolish, boyish men, with the idea that women need to constantly take care of men. But her roles did force America to confront female sexuality. She was Hollywood's first seductress. Many Americans had never seen anything like her. She continues to inspire people around the world today to express themselves freely. She is a voice for the underground, and that, I think, is pretty badass.